Welcome to Basic Training for the Transitioning Military Veteran, Part 1, Understanding the Challenges. This is ICF Certified Business Coach John Sanpetro, and I'm once again joined by Dr. Rich Schuttler, my partner at the Professional Progress Academy, and a retired U.S. Navy veteran of 23 years. Rich, hello, how are you?
Great, John. How are you?
Doing fantastic. Very excited to get into this part of the basic training for the transitioning military veteran course, because I think that this is a really important part. In this video, we're going to explore the challenges facing transitioning military veterans. We're going to help you to recognize the signs to look for to determine whether or not you're dealing with transition stress. A lot of veterans don't even realize that they are undergoing a stressful experience. We're going to discuss coping mechanisms, the good ones and the bad ones, that transitioning military veterans use for addressing these difficulties, and we're going to offer suggestions for dealing with these challenges more effectively. So let's just jump right in, and let's just start by talking about the challenges. There are many, many challenges the transitioning military veteran faces. Some of them are expected, and some of them can be quite a surprise. And it's important to acknowledge these challenges rather than suppressing them and soldiering on. And the first step to acknowledging them is understanding and recognizing them. Rich, when you came out of the Navy, what were you expecting and what caught you off guard? What surprised you?
Well, I think when I first came out of the military, I thought in my own mind that I was set for success. I had been teaching part-time at the University of Phoenix for 3 years before I actually was discharged, because I was teaching in the evenings. I had been going to school. I thought my transition was going to be extremely easy, and it had been, and compared to what maybe some others have gone through. But as much as I thought I was prepared, I still had challenges. So if I look back and say what were the biggest challenges, it was just removing myself from one environment which I was living in for 23 years and going to a completely different environment which I knew about, but yet had different norms, had different an environment around it on a daily basis, and really removing myself from people I had been with for 20-some years under the same understandings, the same norms, the same cultural expectations, and going somewhere else. So it was probably, for me, it was more of a mental challenge than it was anything else.
You know, that's something we talk about, some of the different challenges like we're going to get into right now, discomfort with non-military structure. But one of the things that I hadn't even thought of until you mentioned it was the fact that it's not just an environment that you're leaving, but it's people, friends, really family that you're leaving and walking into an entirely new group of people and friends, and in some cases even family, right?
Well, it's true. And the military is not unique in of itself from a transition perspective. I think most people can relate to having left something somewhere and went on to somewhere else. Maybe it was a job, maybe it was a school, or somebody moved from one city to the next for some reason or another, whether they're in their youth or as an adult. And the challenges of transition are not unique to any one group. They're common for all. And it's just that when you're in the military, whether it be for 4 years, 10 years, or 20 years, the extremes are quite prominent in one's thoughts and one's experiences, particularly in the first 30 or 60, 90 days, because under one structure with the military, it's very much process-orientated. People pretty much help you with everything you need to do. And then when you move into the civilian community, it's far less structured, and you really have to figure it out on your own to a certain degree. While there are support mechanisms, it's not always exactly what everybody needs to be able to help them.
Right, because when you're going into a non-military structure, a lot of times you're dealing with a much more relaxed command hierarchy, different methods of prioritization, and really just in general more of an easygoing environment. And you know, I've known you for several years now, and you've been out of the military for several decades, but I think that even now you have, you know, it still rankles you a little bit when you see people taking too much of a relaxed or easygoing attitude toward getting things done.
Sure, because the military does, and they do it extremely well, is they set everybody up for this very structured environment with deadline dates, expectations. You know everything you need to do to be successful, and you know the parameters of the boundaries, if you will, not to go outside of. In the civilian community, it's far less structured. Even priorities are different. In the military, you're really looking at things that have to get done by certain times, because in particularly cases of a war situation, there is no time to have delays. You have to have certain things done at a certain time, or it could cause loss of life or loss of equipment, loss of progress. But in the military, it continues to be that structure which allows one to be successful. So when you come out, it's far less structured, and that does cause a problem for many people. And as you noted, I do live by the structure. It's also been something that's been a large part of my success, that they set a great foundation. I am a goal-setting machine. I understand how to manage my time really well, and I attribute that to the military as a strength that I walked out with.
Right. And, you said it yourself. When in the military, if you don't pay as much attention to detail as you have to, if you don't pay really, really sharp attention to detail, people could die. I mean, literally, people could die. And I think that non-military, civilian workers just don't have that as a potential consequence. At worst, they'll get fired, but probably they'll just maybe get reprimanded. They're not dealing with the consequences on anywhere near the scale that you're dealing with in the military.
And that's a good thing. Luckily, the civilian community and the work structure
Sure.
is not like that, needless to say. So that's a benefit. But transitioning from one side to the other, if you will, or one structured situation to the other non-structured, takes a little while for most of us. And it took me a while. I literally, after 90 days of being out, I actually went to go see a counselor, not because I was having problems sleeping or with stress, but it was just I needed to have some sort of assistance and having somebody to talk to. And that's why a lot of times now there's support groups that are available for the veterans that are getting out, whether they spent 4 years, 10 years, or 30 years in the military. Because when you surround yourself with people who you can talk about things with, the transition gets easier because you realize there's somebody else who can understand you.
Right. Right. Another challenge that I think a lot of transitioning military veterans face is just how do I translate what I learned in the military to a civilian resume? Because really, when you think about it, the armed forces are probably the best trained force in the world. And the fact that so many veterans have trouble translating that training to civilian skills is it's a real challenge, and I think a surprising one for a lot of veterans. You were saying a moment ago that you're a goal-setting machine, and that's in large part because of your military background and your behavior. So, was this a challenge for you when you came out?
To a certain degree. As I indicated, I had been teaching part-time for the University of Phoenix for 3 years before I retired, and I had set my sights on becoming a professor and teaching as my second career, if you will. And so while I had the ability to translate my teaching skills, and I actually learned those in the military, because for 3 years in Pensacola, Florida, the Navy had me teaching their programs to other sailors that were coming in who were junior to me at the time, and that's very popular in the military, that you might get a 3-year assignment as a teacher. But I also figured, from that, it set a pace inside of me. It says, teaching as a second career would be ideal for me. So while I was probably better prepared in some ways, but my MOS, if you want to call it, my career field in the military was in cryptology and national security, and it doesn't always relate well to the civilian sector, trying to find a job if I wanted to go into corporate America, unless I wanted to work for a Department of Defense contractor, or unless I wanted to go in to do some sort of security at a large company, and might be something to do with cybersecurity or other aspects that deal with technology and security. So it's not always an easy transition, and depending on what one does in the military, there may not be any crossover to the civilian community. I'll just give one example. A Navy man might be on an aircraft carrier on a flight deck that brings in aircrafts. That person may not find that same type of job opportunity on the outside in the civilian world, because while they have experiences dealing with planes and landing them, it's completely different in the way that airplanes land in regular airports. It's just not a need for some of the people. So while they have skills, finding the best way then to transition those skills to the civilian sector is not as easy as one would like it to be.
We're going to devote quite a bit of a subsequent video on some examples and some strategies for doing just that, for translating those skills. But I do think it's, for a lot of veterans, it comes as a surprise that all of those years that they spent doing something day in and day out, that they have so much trouble translating that into something that's going to secure them gainful employment once they are out. The next challenge that a lot of people transitioning military veterans face is simply not being able to relate to or talk to the people in your personal life, your spouse, your family, your friends, and your colleagues. And I guess, this in large part just has to do with the very different body of experience that you have compared to the people who have been in your life either previous to or even during your military career. Is that accurate, Rich?
It is, and you can take a look at it in a different light, if you will, and think of yourself as an artist who is very good at painting, a Van Gogh type artist who just has the ability to create a great picture on a piece of canvas and with paint, and then trying to describe other people how they should be able to do it or what that's about, because other people can't relate to that because they don't have that creativity, they don't have that experience. So for somebody to explain to me how they were able to do that of really ease and making that beautiful picture appear, for me, if I tried it, it would be a big mess. And I wouldn't understand what that person was trying to tell me on how to create the same kind of picture, because I just can't relate to it because I don't have that experience, I don't have that background, I don't have that passion, if you will. And so when you come out of the military, even while you're in the military talking with a spouse, your spouse probably knows and understands you the most and the best of anybody that you mentioned there. Family members, parents, siblings, they're not as in tune because they're not talking to you on a regular basis. And friends and colleagues are even farther divorced, if you will, from the understanding of what one goes through in the military because they have no real experience. They see they know what they see from the TV shows they watch, the movies they've seen John Wayne in, and other things like that, which are not necessarily a true reflection of what one goes through in the military.
When I was 19 years old, I grew up in a small town in Queens, New York, and pretty much, stayed in Queens, as did all of my friends for all of those years. None of us had ever really been anywhere. And then I had the opportunity to live in Japan for a year at age 19, and it was a fantastic experience. But when I got back, I got back to a very different world, because I realized that I now had very little in common with my friends. My worldview had changed. My expectations for myself had changed. I saw a much bigger picture than my friends did, and when I tried to explain that to them, I was very unsuccessful at doing that. And I can only imagine that it must be 10 times more difficult for somebody in the military coming out.
It can be. And I give you an example. When I grew up in the south side of Chicago, and I left there in 1975 after high school and went into the Navy. But I grew up in Chicago in a very difficult, challenging time through the race riots. And I was brought up, not purposely so, but I was a prejudiced young man at that time because that was the culture of the people around me. I didn't understand other cultures, so I didn't like them, which is common around the world in any culture today. But through the military, once I went in and I started becoming friends with people of different cultures, different color skins, different backgrounds, different cities, who I've never met before, and now I'm becoming friends with them. And that's one of the actual beauty pieces of the military, I think, for all of us, is that we all automatically start to learn about other people and their cultures. And we realize that we're not so different after all. As a matter of fact, we have more in common than we have their differences. And when you start going to different countries, or you start eating food and talking and sharing ideas, you start to gain a greater appreciation for people's differences. And when you come back home, and even when I go back home, I notice that still with some of my colleagues there or my friends there, they have different views, and some of them are still more in line with what they used to be. but they didn't have my experiences either. They're much like you said, John. They stayed in the same area. They really live in the same city. They work with the same groups of people they grew up with. They associate still with lifelong friends. And they really don't relate well to me and vice versa. And even though they are interested in what I've done and where I've been, and when I would come home, we would talk. After about the first 20 or 30 minutes of catching up and who's done what and what we're doing, we found that there's a gap of who we used to be to who we are today.
Right.
And so bridging that is a common aspect.
Absolutely, and I've experienced that, and I'm sure that several of the people listening to this program have experienced that as well. Lack of excitement in everyday life is another challenge that transitioning military veterans face. Coming out of the military into civilian life, I think that, for many civilians, life can be, compared to what they did day to day in the military, can be somewhat dull, especially if you were in a combat area or were deployed to a hostile environment. I think coming out, although of course many people can't wait to come out, when they do come out, they realize, this is kind of dull compared to what I had been used to.
There's no doubt that when you're in a forward deployed unit, whether you be in Afghanistan or Iraq or any unfortunate situation where you have to literally be aware 24/7 of what's going around you, because it could mean your life or somebody else's life, that those are challenges, and they're certainly exciting challenges because they keep your awareness is up at the highest levels all the time. But even when you're not in those situations, even in peacetime, somebody in the military every 2 to 3 years is moving. So they're constantly, it's this rotation of 2 to 3 years. That way everybody gets a chance to go to overseas command, to get to come back to the U.S. And so I moved every 2 to 3 years for 23 years. So even in peacetime, I was always in a situation of getting used to a new surrounding, and just when I got used to it, I learned a new job. I would start to get good at it. 9 months out before my next rotation, I would already start planning where I was going. 6 months before that, I would figure out how to pack, where I'm going, how everything's going to happen, how I'm going to ship my vehicle. So even in times of peace, or when you're in a situation where you're not forward deployed, there's always something going on. You're looking for the next advancement. You're looking for the next training opportunity, the next move. And so that is something that just continues to go and go and go, whereas perhaps even somebody in a city who works at a great big company like GM or General Electric, they may make a career there, but they may spend that whole career in the same city, or maybe they may move to another city somewhere along the line, but predominantly they're not dealing with that day-to-day, if you will, or regular kinds of changes that the military really, trains people to be accepted for and conditions us to be really change agents.
Another challenge that people face, and again, I think this is quite a surprise, is just having the day-to-day pressures that they didn't have to worry before, especially family pressures and financial pressures. When you're deployed, especially I think if you're forward deployed, it really becomes an out-of-sight, out-of-mind situation. Maybe your spouse didn't want to distract you or bother you with something that was going on back at home, and so you kind of got used to not having to worry about just the day-to-day family stuff, or whether or not this bill was getting paid on time or that bill was getting paid on time.
Well, the day-to-day pressures in the military, particularly for family, are, I think, a bit different in the sense that in the military, they're very family-centric. They have family programs. They have family centers, recreation centers on the bases. They have places for the kids to go to, different types of programs throughout the after school. They have different types of parks that people play in all the time that are available to the family members. So there's a very large, and luckily a responsive family support group at every base. And that doesn't mean you have to be there. I mean, for the military person who's overseas, their family is still maybe in the continental United States or in another country where they're living. That family support center is there, and they're there 24/7 to provide a lot of help to the families, which benefits the service person because he or she is able to go do their jobs when they have to leave and know that their family is being taken care of. The financial situation is that a lot of military people, particularly the younger ones, the military provides housing for them and their families. They'll put them up in a 2 or 3 bedroom home, depending on how many children they have. If they don't have furniture, they'll provide furniture for a while. So there's this great support mechanism, and the military does it extremely well. And sometimes, sure, they drop the ball, and it's not as good as it could be in every occasion. But overall, most people will tell you that the support that comes for the family is fantastic, and the financial support just as well, because when you don't have to worry about paying rent, you don't have to worry about paying an electric bill, you can really focus on what's important. When you come out into the civilian world, that family support is not necessarily there unless you put yourself into one, such as a good church that you maybe belong to, and the financial concerns, well, all of a sudden now you have to start paying rent, you have to start paying all the other things, and perhaps when you were getting a paycheck in the military, it already included all those extra bonuses that I said as far as the support, and now you have to now pay for these kinds of things. If you want financial support or counseling, that may cost you a certain amount of money, although the VA does offer some support in these areas, and at times it's great, at other times it's just not enough.
And if you are used to being in the military and having that support structure underneath you, when you come out, yeah, almost literally pulling the carpet out from beneath your feet can be very jarring. Any one of these challenges can be very jarring. And if, as we're going through these, you see yourself and your own challenges in some of these examples, then it's quite possible that you are also dealing with some transition stress. And it's very important to recognize the signs of transition stress or stress in general, because more often than not, it's not an overt thing. It's not something where you're consciously aware, hey, I'm stressed out. Usually it affects you in a secondary way, or your body will have some sort of reaction to it. I've known clients who, when they get stressed out, even if they're not overtly feeling stressed, they'll get short of breath. I've known clients who, when they get stressed out, they'll break out in hives, or their blood pressure will go up. There are lots of different ways that we respond to stress. Those are some of the signs. Other signs of stress are anger, short temperament, irritability, lack of patience, depression, physical and mental tension. If you're having trouble sleeping, or if you're gaining or losing a surprising amount of weight, or gaining and losing weight quickly, these all could be signs of stress. And Rich, anger doesn't necessarily mean being angry at other people, right?
That's correct, John, because what happens in many cases is we're not even sure who we're angry at. It's not necessarily that we're angry at people. Sometimes people who are in transition, it doesn't matter where they're transitioning from or what they're used to, but it's that we can become angry at the fact that we ourselves didn't plan better. Even though we may have planned as best we could, we went through all the transition courses, we're as prepared as we could be, but we find out that in this transition, it's not what we thought it would be. So a lot of times people get angry at themselves, and they take it out on themselves. Or they get angry at the military because the military didn't provide enough information. They didn't transition us well enough. And so it's easy to blame somebody else. And there's times when it's easy also to blame our God, because how could our God not have taken care of us and not showed us the way? So anger, it can manifest in many different ways, and I think the value of what we're talking about here, John, is to help people in the transition phase, is to allow an opportunity for everybody who's listening here to look at themselves and say, how do I respond to stress? For me, I know example here, one of the items here is trouble sleeping. When I get stressed out, I don't sleep as well at night, and I know if I'm not sleeping well, there's some kind of stress happening in my body. And because I used to be a fitness trainer, I'm aware that if I even work out too much, or I'm putting too much stress on my body, physical stress, I also don't sleep well. So for me, I know that that's the first sign. If I'm not sleeping well, I can say, okay, why am I stressed? What's causing that stress if I'm not already in tune to it?
I'm the same way. And for me, the physical manifestation of stress for me is tension. My back and my neck get so tight that I actually get splitting headaches because of it, just the base of my neck into my skull, and I'll have to stop and really think, all right, what has me stressed out? And again, it's not something that I'm even consciously aware of, and I have to stop and think and realize that my body is sending me a sign, and that I need to listen to that, and I need to sit back, take a moment, process it, and then take action that's going to alleviate the stress.
Sure, and that probably for other people is seen by perhaps you being irritable more than you would be normally, because if you've got that pain in your neck, you haven't gone through that mental tension that you talked about, that it's hard to be the calm John on a regular basis. Somebody may say something to you and you'll come across irritable, or you will come across as angry because you're dealing with something internally that you're struggling through, and somebody else is trying to either talk to you or just do everyday life, and you come across differently than you would be otherwise, and they'll say, well, John, why are you so irritable?
Absolutely. And so what happens, I think, is it's sort of a domino effect. When one of these things happen, it actually starts to manifest itself in several other areas as well.
Well, sure. I know for myself, when I have trouble sleeping, I don't eat and exercise as much or as well as I would normally because I'm tired. And so I may not cook and eat the right amount of food that really what my body needs, or I may get, because I'm not sleeping well, I'm tired, I'm not as inclined to still go to the fitness center or go for a walk or do what's important to me. And so, like you said, these signs of stress are often manifested in other avenues that we have to be aware of and know that when one thing is happening, it should allow us to be able to say, okay, what's going on here? And when we know the signs of stress, that's the most important thing. And we're all going to have stress. There's no doubt about it, whether we're transitioning or we're just living through everyday life. But the people who are able to transition more successfully, if you will, are those who at least have a basic understanding of how they respond to stress and what some of those signals are.
Absolutely. And then taking those signals and learning to respond to them by establishing and utilizing some coping mechanisms. The problem, or another problem that occurs, though, is some of the coping mechanisms that transitioning military veterans and really anybody utilizes are sometimes not the best ones. They are not the healthiest ones. Some of the coping mechanisms that we see people utilize that are not necessarily good for you are obviously drugs and alcohol, smoking. Eating, a lot of people will eat more when they're stressed, or even eat the wrong things when they're stressed. Comfort food. There's a reason why we call it comfort food. Some people will get into fights. The irritability and the anger will lead to fighting, and in some extreme cases, even escalating depressive thoughts. And let me just say that if you find yourself in that situation, please immediately seek the help of a professional, because they absolutely can help you, and you want to get that help before those depressive thoughts escalate too far and too fast.
Now, these coping mechanisms that you talk about, John, a lot of them I look as what we try to do is escape from our stresses. So we do certain things to take us out of that and put our mind into a different place that we find that's easier. For example, the drugs and alcohol. Now, we may even be prescribed drugs to us by a doctor for certain things, but the continual use of them or abuse of those drugs can cause us to not only escape, but not even want to go back to reality, and that's problematic, needless to say. But when we start talking about the alcohol and the smoking, if we start to see ourselves doing more than normal in these areas, and if we, like you said about food, a common mechanism for many people is to feel better is to eat more, and by eating more, they're filling themselves up to a certain degree. But that's a short period duration kind of thing. It goes away, and so then you want something else. And even the domino effect of these coping mechanisms in many cases. Let's turn on the TV, because if I watch somebody else's life, that mine can't be nowhere near as bad as theirs. So I feel better when I watch these TV shows, which are diluting society, I believe, in general. And some of these coping mechanisms are are things that we do to escape, and we may need that for a period of time, but when we get to extremes, and then that's terrible, and we have to still be able to look at ourselves. And I think in the military, one of the things I found to be true is in the military, as a young sailor, even as a mid-level manager, leader, and even at the top, a lot of people would say when there was a problem, go figure it out. Go figure it out, Seaman Shuttler or Petty Officer Shuttler or Lieutenant Shuttler. The problem is, you know what the problem is, go figure it out. You're smart enough. And so that is ingrained as an attitude or a philosophy, I think, in many military people, is I have to figure this out on my own because I'm smart enough. I've already been trained. I've been educated. Somebody's entrusted me to figure this out. But there's some things we just can't do because we don't have the capabilities. And I believe that men in particular, and I could be wrong, but this is my perhaps wrong stereotype, if it is wrong, is that a lot of men, when they get stressed out, they tend to retract and pull away, much like John Gray talked about, men are Mars, women from Venus, that men tend to go into their caves. They retract, and they look inward, and they figure, I have to figure out the problem because I'm a problem solver. Instead of what really needs to happen is what we need to do when we're in these stressful situations is open up to our spouses, our family, our friends, to medical advice and say, you know what, I need help. And it's okay to ask for help. And it's not a bad thing because there are people around us who want to help us. They're there to help us. But if we have that attitude of, I just got to muscle through this, I'll figure it out sooner or later, then these coping mechanisms start popping up and we start doing things which we wish we wouldn't have done and we know we really shouldn't be doing.
Right. And, you know, I think probably the best way to categorize some of the bad ones, for lack of a better term, is, you know, if the coping mechanism can also be called a destructive behavior, then it's probably one that you want to avoid. Now, there are also many good coping mechanisms, and a lot of people use these as well. Some good examples of positive coping mechanisms are exercise, healthy eating, talking, planning, and even relaxation techniques. All of these things can not necessarily distract you from the problems at hand, but give you the equipment that you need, give you the ammunition that you need to deal with them in a responsible fashion, in a mature fashion, and in an effective fashion.
These coping mechanisms that you mentioned here, John, and we have available to view, are all things that are positive, no doubt. And exercise, and this is one thing I'll probably repeat over and over in the training, and I talk with people all the time in transition, particularly from the military, because the military is exercise-centric, and it means that everything in the military is about staying in shape, being in good physical shape so that your body can meet the demands that's going to be placed on it, whether it be how far you have to run, weight, height restrictions that you have, that you can't be, you know, a certain amount of percentage of body fat that's too much, you have to maintain it. So the exercise in the military is a prominent point, and it's something that we do all the time. It's exercise, 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 because it helps keep your body in shape, keeps your mind sharp. And it's a great thing to do and continue on as one transitions into the civilian world, is to continue that exercising, because it's something that's common. It's common characteristics that we can take with us from the military, the civilian world, to help reduce our stress and do things that are similar than what we've done before. But at the same token, some of these coping mechanisms can be taken to extremes. And by taking them to extremes, they then can become detrimental to us.
Can you explain that a little bit more?
Well, let's just talk about, you know, the one of exercising. You know, exercising is important. I always like to do about an hour exercise 5 times a week, whether it be running, jogging, lifting weights. But if you start all of a sudden then escaping into fitness and you then are doing 2 or 3 hours a day, now you're running marathons, you're lifting weights, you're playing every sport that's possibly there as a way to exercise your body and reduce this amount of stress in your mind, and you're no longer dealing with those, this coping mechanism can have an adverse effect. So too much exercise causes that increased amount of physical stress on your body, which then all of a sudden you start not sleeping as well as you have before, and then you become more irritable, you don't eat as well. So there's can be a negative domino effect as well. and that's just one area which, you look at and say, wow, I have to keep everything in perspective. Even planning. Sometimes people in this transition phase believe that they have to plan, and they keep planning, but they never do things, and they're just constantly sharpening the plan, but never. It's like taking the axe. You're constantly sharpening the axe, but sooner or later you got to take a swing at the tree to cut that tree down. And getting too anal, I guess is one word, or too focused on any one thing is not good, whether it be what we eat, what we do, because life is about a balance. And we find that whether you're in the military or in the civilian world, whether you're young, whether you're old, whether you're male or female, finding a balance in your life is what's important. I think that's one of the main themes of this transition information awareness, is to help people perhaps have a better understanding of how they can achieve balance, but more so help them understand when they're not in balance.
So what it's really about then is taking these good coping mechanisms and not focusing on them so much that they become your life, but just focusing on them to the extent that they become part of a balanced lifestyle.
I think that's exactly right, John. And I'll share a personal example. When I was in the military, I had a lot of extra time, and so particularly near the latter part of my career, as I was coming down towards retirement the last 3 or 4 years, I was basically working a 9-to-5 job. I was at a shore command in the United States, and so I didn't have a lot of the extra stresses on me that I had when I was younger or when I was overseas or forward deployed in the Persian Gulf. And so I was able to take a lot of my time and put it into my education and my fitness. And I got to the point where I decided I wanted to compete amateur bodybuilding. And so I would put in 2 or 3 hours of time of fitness, and some days, but usually it was anywhere between 1 and 2 hours every day for about 5 years. Now I could do that, and it was okay, but when I also retired, I realized that I no longer had that time available in my schedule because the work requirements were different. I had transitioned into a different type of a career, and I no longer had that extra time. And so I had for a period of time, I would still try to fit those 2 hours in every day, and I couldn't. And that was a little stressful for me. So I had to reprioritize my life goals and where I was at and what I wanted to do. And I realized that much like moving anywhere is that some new doors open and some have to close. And so I had to realize that for my new career and my new situation, I didn't have as much time for what I did before, and I had to be able to let some things go, like I let some other things go in retirement from the military, some of the rich traditions that were there, the things I was accustomed to. In the new transition phase, I had to realize that I had to do things differently to be successful, and sometimes that means we have to not do some of the things we did before, which helped us to be a success there.
Absolutely, absolutely. So some of the steps, in addition to incorporating some of these coping mechanisms in a healthy way into your lifestyle, some other steps you can take is to share the challenges that you're facing with your loved ones, your family, and your friends. When I speak to clients, I put this question to them. If you walked up to your spouse and you said, listen, I'm going through something right now, but I don't think you can understand it, so I'm not even going to talk to you about it. How would your spouse react? If you said that to your family members, if you said that to your friends, how would they react? They'd probably be pretty upset with you. I think that often a lot of people who are in stressful situations, who are facing challenges, and Rich, I agree with you, especially men, I think will feel the need to retreat into that cave and just handle it by themselves. And by shutting out their friends, their family, their loved ones, they actually create an even more detrimental situation vis-a-vis the relationships that they have with these people. If they were feeling isolated before, this taking this action of not sharing even further isolates them.
It does. And I think it's something that's particularly important to talk about is what people believe other people's know. So, for example, a military person coming out and has a wife and kids, and that wife has been with him or that spouse has been with her for pretty much the whole career. They've got kids that have grown up in the military. Sometimes the military person believes and perceives that his family member or her family members know exactly what they're dealing with. and so they don't talk about it because they may say to their spouse, honey, how could you not know this? You've been with this and through this with me the whole time. Because there's that sometimes perceived expectation of knowledge, that's sometimes a struggle, and where spouses in particularly have a diverging view because one thinks one way, one thinks the other way, and what they really need to do is sit around the kitchen table perhaps a little bit more often and share openly what these challenges are, not only for the person who is the active duty member, but for the spouse, as well as all dependents, the children, to be able to make sure that everybody's challenges are aired and expressed and shared so that everybody can work together. When they do that, they find that it's easier because everybody knows exactly what they're doing. And I think I've seen enough situations to know that that doesn't happen as much as we would like it to. And I think that's the part of opening up, the man coming out of the cave or the woman realizing that, the husband, while it may have been in the service as the dependent for a number of years, still doesn't truly understand what the military member is going through, and vice versa.
Right, right. So what we're talking about is establishing, a mini support group within your family, but you can take that a step further if you feel like you need to speak with people who are really going through exactly what you're going through. Then join a support group. That's another very positive step you can take to help deal with transition. And one of the points that I would like to make is that joining a support group is not by any means a sign of weakness, and if anything, it's a sign of strength, and it's a show of your seriousness in the desire to make this transition as unstressful as possible for both you and the people around you.
The support groups are critical, John, and they're critical, and we see the value of them not only in this people that are transitioning, but even for business people. For example, John, you and I, we talk and we help promote the concept of mastermind teams, where
Right.
people who are like-minded come together to want to benefit not only themselves, but those that are involved with it, and they're also in that group, to take them and their businesses to a greater level. In the military, for those who are in the transition, if you will, the support groups can be anything like the VAF, the Veterans of Foreign War, and they're pretty much in every major city and even pretty much a lot of the smaller cities around the country where they have groups like that who come together. There's veterans, and there's a couple different types of groups of those. There's also the Veterans Administration. The VA is a great place to go and get information about different types of groups around the world, if you will. They're both physically located where people can go to, but you can also go through and see and engage online as well. Even in the outside the military provided support groups, like for example the church I go to, they have a number of different groups there. It could be those who are for couples, it could be for singles, it could be for Bible studies, but there's a lot of different groups available they're available to anybody and everybody, but it's yet another tool, if you will, for the military who are in transition to get better grounded, if you will, in their own community, because when they go to these support groups in their own community, then they start to see these people on a regular basis when they're shopping, when they're going down the street. And it's much like the military. You start to see more of your friends again who you have things in common with, and that helps the transition alone because, as we talk about here on this slide, it's about the environment and the association. When you put like-minded people in an environment together, they thrive better because they have people to talk to, people to share with, people to grow with, and that association, if you will, of being collegial, being friendly, being of shipmates, if you will. Like in the military, we still have reunions every once in a while. About every couple of years, I'll go to a reunion of the shipmates I was on ships with or duty stations with, and it's that association which then helps everybody to be able to talk through and remind what was going on in the past, where we're at today, and where our goals are for the future.
And if you don't know where to look for a support group, we're going to put several links in the resources section of this site for you to make it as easy as possible. Finally, another step that you can take if you feel like you need to speak with somebody one-on-one, is to do just that. Speak with somebody who specializes in speaking with people in your situation. Again, there's nothing wrong with that. All it shows is a serious commitment to your success, to your future, to your family's future, and it can be and will be extraordinarily helpful to you.
You know, John, in the military, particularly for enlisted people, but it still holds true for officers. When we first went into the military, we went into a boot camp situation. And in that boot camp situation, there was one person who was the leader. And he or she was the person who we went to with every problem and concerns. That's the person who guided us through the transition from the civilian world to be conditioned into the military. Now, at times that person yelled at us and screamed at us, and other times that person was the parental person that we went to when we had problems. In the military, as they're coming out, the veterans in the civilian community don't necessarily have that same kind of boot camp transition. So there's not that one person that's available like when we went in. And so when you talk about speak to someone, we have to find that person to speak to. For me, it was a retired fireman who had spent his whole career serving in a different capacity than I did in the Navy, but had an understanding of what it meant to serve, and that he had retired, so he had some sort of transition of his own that I could relate to, and he could relate to me. So when I decided to speak to someone, I reached out and said, you know, I want to talk with somebody who had some experience or could be of value to me. And I think that helped. Well, I know it actually helped me at that time. At the moment when I was doing it, I wasn't so sure. I was hesitant about talking with somebody else about it because I thought I had it all together. Here I was, 23-year veteran. I had been in the enlisted community. I had been an officer. I earned my doctorate degree. And I thought, well, gee, I should be able to figure this out on my own. But yet I wasn't. And by opening up to my spouse, my wife at the time, we were talking, and she says, well, maybe you should talk with somebody. And luckily, I was open enough to hear that message, and I went and talked with somebody. And literally, for me, I didn't have to go to talk with that person a lot. But what I did find was a new friend, and a new friend in my community. Also, it just happened to be that I saw that person every once in a while out in town. We would go for restaurant meals together, and I met a new friend.
Yeah, I think that's great, and I think that that's a really good lesson for anybody who is watching this video. It never really hurts to speak with somebody, and for most people, it will actually give a great deal of help. And we certainly hope that we've been able to help you over the last hour or so learn what some of the challenges are, be able to recognize those challenges, recognize the signs of stress, identify some of the coping mechanisms and which ones are healthy, not so healthy, and also some of the steps you can take. If you have any questions at all, please don't hesitate to email Rich and myself at admin@proprogressacademy.com. Rich, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, John. Always glad to work with you and to create this opportunity to help serve those who have served us so well.
Absolutely. And when you're ready, your next step is to proceed to part 2 of this video series. Thanks a lot.